Lena had learned to move like a shadow, quiet, efficient, and invisible. At 26, she worked the morning shift at a small family-owned diner tucked on the edge of downtown. With her dark hair always covering the left side of her face and her eyes fixed on the ground, she blended easily into the buzz of coffee refills and clinking forks. The regulars at the diner knew her as the quiet one. She never spoke more than necessary, never smiled unless it was safe, and never lifted her hair from her face. Most assumed she was simply shy. None of them knew what lay beneath the curtain of her hair. A long scar traced its way from her temple to her jawline, jagged and pink, like a lightning bolt frozen in time. She'd gotten it when she was 11, in a car accident that killed her mother. The glass had shattered across her face, and though the doctors did their best, the damage was deep. Since then, Lena had perfected the art of disappearing. She'd tried makeup, scar creams, dermatologists. Nothing made it go away. But worse than the scar itself were the reactions. The flinch in strangers' eyes, the sudden silence when she walked into a room, or the cruel, unthinking comments whispered behind menus. As a teenager, she dropped out of prom the night before. In college, she stopped attending after her roommates stared too long. Now, Lena's world was small, safe, and manageable. She lived in a modest apartment a few blocks from the diner. No pets, no close friends, no pictures on the walls. She walked to work before sunrise and walked home long after dark. She told herself she was content. But sometimes, when she served couples sharing pancakes or watched children laughing with syrup on their chins, a quiet ache curled in her chest. Her co-workers were kind enough, but distant. They tried to include her in lunch breaks or birthday cakes, but she always declined. Over time, they stopped asking. There was only one place Lena allowed herself a moment of escape, the diner's rooftop. During breaks, she would sneak up there with her book and a small thermos of tea. No one ever followed her. There, with the hum of the city below, she didn't have to hide. It was on one such morning in early spring that something unusual happened. A man walked into the diner. He wasn't like the usual crowd. He wore a tailored navy coat, a silver watch, and leather shoes that clicked gently against the linoleum floor. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Lena's attention. It was the way he looked at her. Not at her scars. At her. He gave a small nod and a polite smile when she came to take his order. "Black coffee, no sugar," he said, his voice calm but warm. Then he opened a newspaper, not seeming to notice her nervous hands as she jotted down the order. Lena told herself not to overthink it. Just another customer. She brought him his coffee and disappeared behind the counter. But even from there, she felt his gaze. Not sharp, not pitying. Just present. She didn't know it yet, but this man would soon change everything. The man came back the next morning. Lena had barely stepped onto her shift when she saw the same navy coat and polished shoes slide into booth 7. His coffee order was the same, black, no sugar. He greeted her with a gentle, "Good morning," and a brief smile that made her stomach knot with confusion. Over the next week, he returned every day. Always the same booth. Always alone. Always with that newspaper he read more out of habit than interest. Lena noticed he never brought a phone, never rushed, and never looked impatient. And each time she approached his table, he looked her directly in the eyes, kindly, steadily, as if she wasn't something to glance over. She found herself wondering about him, even against her will. Who was he? A lawyer? A professor? His calm presence reminded her of the people who existed just beyond her world, the ones who attended conferences, drove luxury cars, and spent their weekends at vineyards. He didn't seem to belong to the neighborhood, yet he blended in like he'd been coming to the diner for years. One day, curiosity got the better of her. She brought his coffee and lingered a moment longer than usual. "You always sit here," she said, quietly, almost regretting the words as they left her lips. He looked up, surprised, but pleasantly. "That's true," he replied. But only because it's the seat with the best view. She blinked. Of the street. He smiled. Of the service. Her cheeks flushed instantly. She turned quickly and walked away, heart pounding. What was that supposed to mean? Was it just a compliment, or— "Don't overthink it," she muttered to herself in the kitchen. But she was already thinking about it. For the rest of the day, her thoughts spiraled. Why would someone like him notice someone like her? Had he not seen the scar? Or worse, had he seen it, and this was all some cruel game? The following day, he returned. But this time, he brought something with him, a book. When Lena placed the coffee on the table, he gently slid the book across to her. The cover read, "The Light That Finds You." "I thought you might like this," he said. "It's about someone who hides from the world, and what happens when someone finally sees them." She hesitated. "You think of me like that?" He nodded, but not in a patronizing way. "I think you carry something heavy. And you've been doing it alone for too long." Her throat tightened. She had no words. The man, whose name, she later learned, was Adam, never asked about the scar. He never once glanced at it, even as the weather warmed and the layers she wore thinned. With him, there was no need for explanations, no cautious distance. He was just present. He became part of her morning rhythm. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lena began to change. She started wearing her hair in a loose ponytail. She smiled a little more easily. One morning, she even laughed, really laughed, at one of the cook's terrible puns. People noticed. But more importantly, she noticed. And for the first time in years, Lena felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible. Lena had grown used to hiding. For most of her adult life, she lived within a quiet routine that kept her small and unseen. Her apartment was plain, her clothing muted, and her world predictably safe. She avoided mirrors, photographs, and the kinds of conversations that made people look too long or care too much. That way, she wouldn't have to explain, wouldn't have to relive. But with Adam, things were changing. It wasn't just that he showed up, it was how he showed up. He asked about her favorite books, her opinion on the day's weather, or which songs she secretly danced to in the kitchen. And he listened, really listened, as if every answer she gave was a rare treasure worth keeping. One Thursday morning, Lena found herself humming under her breath while wiping down the counter. The other waitress, Carla, paused and looked over, half joking, "You in love or something?" Lena rolled her eyes and smiled, a blush creeping up her neck. "No, just in a good mood." It was true. For the first time in years, her mornings didn't feel like a wait. She woke up curious, about what Adam might say, about what new book he'd recommend, about the next unexpected moment that would make her feel seen. But just as her walls were beginning to crumble, something unexpected happened. Adam didn't show up. Not that day, or the next, or the one after that. By the fourth morning, she found herself peeking at the door every few minutes, pretending she wasn't hoping. Her chest tightened with a feeling she hated, disappointment. And beneath that, fear. Had she been foolish? Had he seen the scar and finally decided he couldn't pretend anymore? She shook the thought from her head, trying to pour coffee without spilling. But her hands trembled. She told herself she was being dramatic, that he probably had work, or travel plans, or just a cold. Still, the silence lingered like an echo. A week passed before he returned. The bell over the door rang, and there he was, same coat, same warm eyes, but something was different. He looked tired, pale, like he'd been somewhere heavy. Before she could speak, he approached her with an apology. "Lena," he said softly, "I'm sorry I disappeared. My mother passed away. I had to fly out unexpectedly." Her heart dropped. "I'm so sorry, Adam." He nodded, eyes glassy. "She was everything to me. Kind, funny. She always believed in seeing people fully, even the ones hiding in plain sight. Lena swallowed hard. She would have liked you, he added, almost to himself. They sat at his usual booth that morning, but it wasn't like the others. There was no flirting, no teasing. Just two people quietly sharing the weight of grief and memory. Lena didn't press him with questions. She simply listened. For once, it wasn't about her scar, her shame, her loneliness. It was about him, and how life could shift under your feet without warning. In the silence that followed, something else shifted. She reached across the table, fingers trembling slightly, and gently placed her hand on top of his. It was the first time she'd initiated touch in years. He looked at her, startled, but not because she reached out. He looked at her like she was something rare. And then he smiled. "I'm really glad I came back," he said. And this time, Lena believed him. Lena stood in front of her mirror longer than usual. The dress she wore was simple, a soft shade of lavender that hugged her frame without drawing attention. Her hair fell in soft waves. She'd even applied a touch of mascara, which felt almost rebellious. But her eyes kept drifting to the scar. It ran from the corner of her left eye down to the edge of her jaw. Faded, but permanent. Some days, she forgot it was there. Other days, days like this, it roared in her mind like a siren. She considered covering it with foundation. She'd done that once before years ago, when she applied for a receptionist job and wanted to look normal. She didn't get the job. She never wore makeup again. But tonight was different. Tonight, Adam had invited her to a formal fundraiser, a company charity gala where cocktail attire was the dress code and business elites would mingle over wine and music. It was his world. His people. Not hers. She'd almost said no. But then she remembered the way he looked at her hand when she placed it over his. Like it mattered. Like she mattered. So, she took a breath and left the scar as it was, bare, visible, hers. The event was held at a sleek downtown hotel. Velvet ropes, marble floors, and elegant dresses swept past her like waves. Lena had never been in a room like this. She clutched her small clutch purse tightly, willing herself not to bolt. And then she saw him. Adam stood by the bar, tall and elegant in a dark suit. He turned, and his face lit up when he saw her. Not the polite smile one might offer a guest, but something real. Familiar. He walked to her without hesitation. "You look beautiful," he said. She laughed nervously, her hand going instinctively to the scar. "Even with this?" He paused, looked her in the eye. "Especially with that." There was no pity in his voice. No performative sweetness. Just the quiet reverence of someone who saw more than most. "Lena," he continued, his voice low, "I didn't invite you tonight to impress anyone. I wanted you here, because I wanted you here." She felt something inside her loosen, something long wound tight. Adam took her hand gently, just as the music shifted. Without asking, he led her to the dance floor. At first, she moved stiffly, uncertain. But then she noticed people weren't staring. The scar wasn't a spotlight. It was just part of her. And somehow, in Adam's presence, it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a chapter of her story. As they danced, she felt light. Not because the room had changed, but because she had. Later in the evening, a woman approached them, a striking brunette in a designer dress who clearly recognized Adam. "You must be the woman he's been talking about non-stop," she said with a smirk. "It's nice to finally meet you." Lena froze. "He's been talking about me?" Adam chuckled, slightly embarrassed. "A little, yeah." The woman smiled warmly. "I hope he told you that his mother always said he'd fall for someone with soul." And just like that, the pieces clicked. The scar. The sadness. The silence she'd carried for so long. None of it scared him. Because Adam hadn't just chosen to see past the scar, he had chosen to see her. And she was finally ready to be seen. Lena lay awake that night, her head resting on her pillow, the evening still playing across her mind like scenes from a dream. She reached up, fingertips grazing the familiar path of the scar that had shaped so many of her fears. But tonight, it felt different. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a wall, it felt like a window. The next day, Lena arrived at the cafe early. The place was still quiet, the sun barely stretching its golden arms through the front windows. She stood behind the counter, organizing cups and menus, her normal routine, but her heart was anything but normal. It was loud, awake, alive. She kept thinking about Adam, the way he took her hand in front of everyone, the way he danced with her like they were the only two people in the room. And that sentence, whispered by the woman at the gala, lingered. His mother always said he'd fall for someone with soul. A soul. Not a face. Not a figure. Not some superficial perfection. But soul, the kind that's been broken and healed, quiet and kind, humble and steady. Around mid-morning, the usual rush began. Regulars came in with half-slept eyes and orders they barely had to speak anymore. Lena moved with her usual grace, quick, polite, kind. And then she saw them. A group of women near the back. Young. Well-dressed. Loud. She knew them, not personally, but socially. They'd come in from time to time, always casting side glances at her, whispering just low enough to feel like knives. Today, they were whispering again. One of them tilted her phone toward the others, giggled, then looked at Lena, right at the scar. Lena's stomach dropped. Her hand reached for her cheek instinctively. That old voice crept back in. You don't belong. They're laughing at you. You're not enough. She excused herself to the back storage room, her breath quickening. She felt the walls close in, the air thicker than it should be. She pressed her palms to her eyes. All that progress, undone in seconds. Then, a knock. Lena. Adam's voice. She quickly wiped her eyes and cracked the door. You okay? She managed a small nod. They were just being who they are, she whispered. I shouldn't let it get to me. But it had. Adam didn't say anything at first. He just reached into his coat pocket and handed her something, a folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was a photograph. A woman, perhaps in her 40s, with a burn scar on the left side of her face. Faint smile. Eyes full of strength. My mother, Adam said softly. Lena looked up, stunned. She was in a car accident when I was 9. Some people treated her like she didn't belong anywhere beautiful. But to me, she was beauty. Because she never let the scar take her kindness away. Lena's eyes stung with tears. I see that in you, he continued. The same light. The same fight. She couldn't speak. Only nod. In that moment, something inside her whispered louder than the cruel voices ever had. You are not your wound. You are what you did with it. That night, Lena stood in front of her mirror, not to conceal but to confront. 4 years, the reflection staring back at her had felt like an adversary, a daily reminder of trauma, rejection, of people turning away mid-conversation. The scar had become more than skin deep, it had grown roots into her identity. But now, it felt different. The mark hadn't vanished, but the weight it carried, that unbearable emotional freight, had lessened. It no longer felt like a sentence. She slowly unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. Then she did something she hadn't done in nearly a decade. She pulled her hair back, fully exposing the left side of her face. And she stared. Not with disgust. Not with fear. With curiosity. With quiet strength. At work the next morning, Lena chose not to style her hair in the usual strategic way. She didn't let it fall across her cheek or hide behind a scarf. She wore it loose, natural, not as a statement, but as an act of inner truth. When the same group of well-dressed women came in and glanced at her, she met their eyes. Not with a challenge. Not with defiance. Just presence. Calm, centered presence. That's when something clicked inside her. She no longer needed their approval. She no longer filtered her worth through the lens of others' discomfort. Later that week, Adam returned to the cafe, but this time he didn't come as a customer. He came with papers. He gently placed a folder on the counter. "This is for you." Lena opened it, brows furrowing. Inside were forms, blueprints, and a business proposal. "I know your dream was to have your own place. A cozy cafe with books and live music. You once told me that when we were talking about favorite smells, yours was coffee and old pages." Lena blinked. "You remember that? Every word." He smiled. "There's a small space near the park. Needs renovation. But it's got charm. And light. And a little garden in the back. I'd like to help you open it. As a partner." Lena was stunned. "Adam, this is too much." "No," he replied. "What's too much is the world not seeing what you're capable of. What's too much is how long you've carried your light inside because others couldn't handle its shape." She put a hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. "I believe in you, Lena," he said gently. "Not because of your past. Not in spite of your scars. But because with all of it, you're still the kindest, strongest soul I know." That night, Lena stood in the empty space Adam had shown her. Dust danced in the fading sunlight. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, the walls bore the history of past tenants, and yet the room felt like a canvas. She saw it clearly, a row of books by the window, string lights, the smell of cinnamon coffee in the air, a space where people could feel seen. Just like Adam had seen her. Just like, finally, she saw herself. Not broken. Not incomplete. Just human, beautifully, tenderly, fiercely human. And for the first time in a very long time, Lena smiled, not with hesitation, but with hope. 6 months later, the doorbell above the entrance jingled softly as the first customers stepped into Lena's cafe. The space was small, but every inch had been touched by intention. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with second-hand books, poetry, mystery, biographies, stories that had lived and breathed in other hands. Warm lighting glowed from vintage lamps, casting golden halos on the terracotta floor. Near the back, a tiny stage held a single mic and a piano, ready for evenings of soft music and spoken word. And behind the counter stood Lena. Her apron was flour-dusted. A curl had escaped her bun. Her eyes shimmered with quiet pride. But most notably, her scar was uncovered, untouched, and unhidden. She no longer flinched when people looked her way. She no longer second-guessed a smile. And on the rare days when someone's stare lingered just a little too long, she met it with a nod of grace and moved on. Because this place wasn't about hiding. It was about being. Word about Lena's cafe spread quickly, not just for its homemade pastries or its pewitukan shelf, but for something harder to describe. People said it felt like a place you remembered even before you'd been there. That it was comforting, honest, safe. People came with laptops and heartaches, with poetry journals and divorce papers, with wriggly toddlers and loneliness they couldn't name. And somehow they stayed. Because Lena saw them. The way she had once longed to be seen. One chilly November evening, Adam arrived after closing, as he often did. He brought a plant for the windowsill and stayed to help clean up. Over mugs of spiced tea, they sat across from each other in the quiet. "I was thinking," Lena said, brushing crumbs off the counter, "of starting an open mic night. Not just music. People telling their stories. Just talking. Like no masks." "I love that," Adam replied. "You've created a space where people don't have to pretend." She paused. "You helped me do that." Adam shook his head gently. No. You did that. I just gave you the blueprint. You built the soul. They looked at each other then, really looked. And all the moments that had led to now, the spilled coffee, the awkward silences, the healing, the courage, settled quietly between them like dust in sunlight. Lena, Adam said, voice low, I know I've said this before, but I'm proud of you. Not just for the cafe. For choosing to be seen. Her hand reached across the counter, slow, deliberate. He took it, just like he had that first day, but this time not out of sympathy. This time out of love. They didn't rush. There were no grand declarations. Just shared hours, late-night planning, silent support, and a growing, steady warmth. And when, a year later, Adam proposed under the flickering cafe lights, Lena didn't hesitate. She said yes. Not because she needed to be saved, but because she had already saved herself. In a frame by the cafe's front door hung a handwritten sign. Kindness is not a weakness. Scars are not shame. This is a place for every imperfect, beautiful story. Welcome home. Lena's cafe became more than a business. It became a sanctuary. A place where stories began again. And the shy waitress who once hid behind her hair? She was now the woman who built a space where everyone could be seen, just as they were. Scars and all.